all here, welcome to the webinar, Driving the Future, Sound as the Next Frontier in Automotive Design. This is a webinar collaboration between Sonic Minds and Brian Kayatsa. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Brian, but in the age of electric and autonomous vehicles, sound is no longer just about engines or alerts. It's about identity, emotion, and trust. In today's webinar, we will take a deep dive into the strategic integration of sound, and we'll explore how intentional sonic design can shape the user experience, define a brand's identity, and become a vital business asset in the automotive industry and beyond. So join us for this rare conversation with Brian, the visionary behind Ford's first multi-sensory design system. Brian is going to share with us how he helped shape the soundscapes of iconic models like the Mustang Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning and more. So take it away, Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Anton. I appreciate the intro. So super excited to talk to everybody today about the sound work that was done at Ford. And I appreciate Karsten, you setting this up and making this happen. Quick intro, Brian Kayatsa. I am an experienced designer located in Detroit. I spent 8 years at Ford crafting not only the sonic strategy for both Ford and Lincoln, but starting to work with communicative light and ambient messaging across the board, connecting the emotional needs of the customer to the product was one of my main goals while I was there. And I'm just really excited to talk about that today.
Sounds great, Brian. Thank you for joining. Yeah, we have had some talks before, and as we also discussed earlier, the journey from old combustion cars into new e-cars. As I said, a modern e-car today is more like an iPad on wheels, and how that's transitioned from the old engineering mindset into the new engineering mindset, how to use sound strategically and also emotionally when in the driving experiences, and that's a huge involvement. We experience that from our clients as well. So I'm really curious to pick your brain and hear your sounds you made and have a really nice discussion with you, Brian, today. I know you have made a presentation for us, and I thought, why don't you just dive into it, and then you and I can have some questions about that, how you develop the sounds and the thoughts behind, and the challenges you have working with a legacy automobile company like Ford, going from the old mindset into the new mindset, So please share your day here, Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Karsten. So a little bit about my past, pre-Ford. I came from New York City. I was in the motion graphics, film, and commercial production industry for quite a while. So I was designing, editing, animating, and doing live action direction. A lot of my focus was storytelling, just using mixed media from footage to graphics and sound. So I entered Ford Motor Company in 2017 as a UX UI designer. There were about 5 people on what we called the digital experience team. It was just an amazing time in the auto space. We were at what everybody wants to say an inflection point. Our main responsibility in that team was just converting Ford from analog to digital. The clusters, the center screen, that whole interior experience, going from, like you said, Karsten, the legacy technology, the legacy thinking processes into this new modern digital space. And the first product that we worked on was the Mach-E.
Yeah, I know that car.
Yeah, it's quite a product. There were just inherent challenges and amalgamations on the Mach-E that were unique in so many ways. It was an electric vehicle. It was a performance electric. And then behind that, the conversation about branding, naming, legacy archetypes at Ford, so much polarizing, yet so much empowering information just went into the Mach-E that made it a really great first product for us to cut our teeth on, to learn from, and to begin just designing in a digital world. And it was during the Mach-E that I started really introducing sound. And then just quickly a look at, my trajectory at Ford. After Mach-E, we jumped into Lightning and Mustang.
Yeah.
Then I spent 2 years on the Lincoln brand, which was amazing. A luxury product, much different than the Ford ecosystem. And then as I started to evolve as a designer at Ford, I started to work on light and begin to think about multi-sensory and really the combination of pixel, light, and sound inside and outside of the vehicle.
That sounds very interesting. We also see that the brands who approach us, they're trying to learn because it's a whole new domain. They might have engineers and designers, but what about sound designers? When should sound come into a production process? Sometimes they come in too late, or should it be in the very beginning? Because everything, has to correlate: the visual, the texture, the sound. And I remember the Volvo brief we got many years ago. We wanted the sound of leather and cedar tree. How does that sound like? We have to make a full cohesive experience. So yeah, I can totally get your point here. So I'm curious to hear about your process and the challenges you had, and also how to implement it. So I know you've made some slides for us, Brian. So
yeah, I just like being able to point to something and speak to things. And no, it's such a great thing to comment on and put a lens over is when does sound enter into any conversation? And for me,
process, when should we talk about sound in the process?
When should we talk about sound? And it's interesting, coming from the commercial world, I had a certain perspective on sound that people in the auto space did not. I had colleagues and peers in my earlier career, that editors that wouldn't touch picture until sound was locked.
Yeah.
And so I had that appreciation
Interesting.
and that understanding of a tight soundtrack for an intro, a narrative middle piece, a crescendo, and then an outro. And it was that same type of thinking that started to kind of dawn on me while I was working on the UX UI stuff at Ford. And you talk about when should sound enter picture. The first thing we did while I was at Ford was start to think about a design language. I was on a UX UI team. I was embedded with different designers. There's actually even a product designer on our team, which was amazing because he just brought such a unique perspective. We were thinking about the materiality of the design and the screens, the 3D, the look, the colors. So when sound became a part of that conversation, it was synergistic. It was happening in parallel. And truly that was ideal. And it was sort of, from my perspective, I was like, hey guys, this is a really great time for sound to start to evolve, because we were doing everything from welcomes to farewells, all of these different types of motion driven pieces. We were going from analog to digital. So these motion graphics, broadcast design type of things were happening. And it was like, I was bringing renders to meetings without sound. And I was going, hey, this is really weird. I felt like I was watching old silent movies. And we began to have those conversations about sport mode, Zen, different emotional states, different types of energy. How can we compel and how can we tell a story? So from this silent landscape, I started to really unpack the different moments and try and tell a story. I saw it as, like I had said, with sound, intros, outros, crescendos. And I started to see the automotive experience in the same way. You approach a vehicle, you open a door, you have welcome animations, and I saw choreography. And I really wanted to kind of unpack that and understand all the different moments and all the different nuances of each of them. And how do we kind of thread sound and connect the moments from pixel to sound, together for the customer.
That's a very interesting approach. We also, when we work with sound with our clients, we also discuss all these things here, but you could also see that there's no audio responsible in many companies. They haven't taken that into account. And as I talked to you earlier, we see actually now a car is now a iPad on wheels. So I think the brands that started from digital, like, the Chinese brands, etc., but also Tesla, they really develop their brand from digital and not the other way around as you did. But also I'm curious to hear about the design language. Like we talk about design semantics. So if you have a logo that is square, the sound should also be representation of that. If the texture and the touch you're having is soft or leather, is it cold, is it glass, is it metal, the sound should also be a natural extension of that in some way. So we have this cohesive experience. So I guess it must be getting more and more complicated to produce a car today, because there's so many, domains, the visual guys, the product designers, the visual designers, and now the sound designers. So there are many chefs in the kitchen having
Yeah,
discussions,
absolutely.
and all have an opinion, I guess. I also want to talk to you about, how do you discuss sounds with your peers, or the boss from Ford says, my wife doesn't like this sound. Well, I didn't ask if she liked it. We're about to, you know,
Well, it's interesting, Carson. I mean, I think, let me kind of just get through some of these slides. So I went from thinking about the choreography and the different moments of the auto experience, and I began to think about how to thread those moments together. And this is just an example of an approach scenario. So it's starting to really kind of fuse light and sound for the customer in a cohesive way. And it was through pieces like this that I began to tell stories to the cross-functional teams and to the executives and to folks who had never thought about digital cohesion before. It was also my, how do we do, I had goals ultimately. I said, you started to really establish what sound could do, how it could really be the connective tissue between all the different experiences. And then right away, I also started to understand the branded aspect of sound. And it was very challenging in an ecosystem like Ford. Ford is a house of brands, ultimately.
Yeah.
You go over to a brand like Lincoln, and it's a cohesive set of products. There's one type of customer, but Ford doesn't really have that kind of setup. You have Mustang, you have truck, you have your B car, you have a pretty complex ecosystem of products. So it was important to create a sonic language that connected all those products, leveled up from product to brand, and then also had the technology behind to support this type of ecosystem building.
Yeah.
So lighting, sound, immersive, all of that inside of a vehicle that ultimately wasn't really intended to be that robust. I mean, you keep bringing up Tesla or Rivian, these other, these more startup brands and these OEMs that run lean from the inception. So they're able to build an OS. They're able to bring sound in at the inception of product design. So Ford didn't really have all of those luxuries. It was a lot more challenging. So from my perspective, it was really important to say, these are the things we have to focus on in order to accomplish better experiences for our products.
Did you start from a clean sheet also? Was there any sounds present at the moment? Did you have any, foundational sounds that you could take, or did you have to start from scratch?
Oh, it's such a great question, and I'll get to that in a second when I play, chimes. For instance, if you say the word chimes, in any in any auto environment, any company or around any meeting table, that's the sound they're going to know. They're going to know, hey, seatbelt chime. Hey, door open chime. It's just the go-to piece of sonic content that has been part of the automotive space since day one. So you're working with engineers who are used to basically providing those basic alerts to their customers. So along with this new type of thinking around digital, we started to expand the different types of sounds and the needs for sounds. Especially when you went into electric vehicles, you had a lot of the work that we did at Ford was based on, there were two hemispheres. There was the ICE vehicle, and then there was the EV. And clearly the EV has so much more need and room for creativity and scalability when it comes to any kind of experience building. So it was a much richer, it ended up becoming a much richer palette. So you have these legacy engineering teams that aren't used to that amount of content, that amount of feature integration with sound and light. So there's a lot, like, and I was telling you this earlier, Karsten, there's a lot of my time was spent educating and evangelizing and trying to get people to understand and appreciate the power
I can see people are asking if you're sharing something. We cannot see what you're sharing right now, Brian. So if you want to share your slide, I think you should do that.
Did I stop sharing? I don't know how that happened.
No, I think if you share your screen.
That's weird.
Because I don't see your screen sharing here.
You guys see it now?
Something's happening. Here we go. Thank you, Brian. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. I've been speaking to this whole the
Yeah,
deck
I was
this whole
wondering too.
time.
But also, while you're opening your slides here, also the question about, I could also imagine you will need to create some kind of language with you and your team, because you can discuss colors. This is black, my background is blue, and when my headsets are white, then you know what it is. But how do you communicate? We want a sound that is, safe in a modern way. It has to be some kind of roomy, did you educate your team, or how did you create a language so you can actually, how do we communicate power? How do you communicate simplicity? What does that mean for us? How does
Sure.
simplicity sound? I'm curious to hear your sound drivers, and please, if you can dive into that, Brian.
Cool. So, I was talking to a little bit of this stuff. So I was talking about, the different aspects of and the goals that I had. Also thinking about using sound as the connective tissue and building a framework, pixel, light, and sound. A lot of our early explorations coming from the UX UI team was, how do we connect sound and screen? So there were all these beautiful tests that we did using sound for these different moments. And from that, Carson, exactly like you're asking, we started to think about, how do we create a language? How do we create a system that we can, communicate to C-suite, to executives, to other creatives around the globe, and have educated conversations about sound in this complex ecosystem. So we created what we called the system of the smart surface sound. We began to think about the different quadrants, so the different pillars that we needed to produce sound for a Mustang, or for a truck, or for an EV. And across that spectrum, we came up with this 4-pillar system. The first pillar was power, the power of performance. An ecosystem like Ford, you have vehicles like the Mustang. Substance was the purpose and endurance. So you think about our truck lineup, you think about utility vehicles, and you need a space or a sonic language to fill that quadrant. And then you get into the EV space and you start to think about melodic phrases or optimism. So you need something that's more uplifting, a little bit more optimistic. And then, and for that whole spectrum of your emotions, you need comfort and stability. And you've used the word trust before. So we created this final pillar called serenity. And so we started to define those different pillars by unique sounds and ingredients that we could tune for our different compositions.
So when is the user presented for the sound here, the power sound here?
Well, basically the power sound is the sound of performance. And you'll start to hear, sounds that are distorted and saturated. So it's evocative of the iconic Ford engines, richer, more. So we would lean into this pillar for, the more performance emotional spaces, or the more performance products. And like I said, we started with Mach-E, and then the phone rang and we needed to do lightning. So we started to think about how to evolve the entire strategy. So we started to add the other pillars. It was a bit of an evolution, so substance was born from truck. Substance was more about bold sound design, using materiality. So we started to sample sounds, synthesize those, and include those in our sound designs. So you can start to hear things like an anvil, or strikes of metal, or pieces of wood, or things like that.
So just to be clear, these elements here, these were the foundation, the ingredients of your whole audio ecosystem, right? So that's how you try to build. This is how we we express ourselves in sound when the terms talk about simplicity. This is how we should sound when we talk about power. And then that can be,
Absolutely.
skinned or tuned up and down depending on how much power do you want to present in a given situation, I guess. Is that true?
100%, Karsten. And I'll kind of land this little bit exactly like that. Once I run through the pillars. So simplicity. So you start to hear a drier, crisper, more tonal, melodic phrases. So when we started to think about brandability or sonic logos, you dip into simplicity and start to tune that one up because you want a melodic phrase or something that is memorable. So simplicity becomes a little bit higher in your tuning spectrum. And then finally, serenity. Serenity is more of the EV sound. So sweeping pads, richer layers, more floating ambient type sounds.
Beautiful.
And then you start to see, we get into the work, and you can see right away how we start to take those different pillars and tune them for the results. So for Mach-E, it was a performance BEV. So you have power and simplicity. You don't have any of your truck pillar or no serenity in your main welcome and farewell, but you start to be able to see how we can tune using these different pillars in different ways. So we'd go into meetings and we'd say, well, here is one with a little bit more simplicity. Here's one with a little less power. And then right away, folks who aren't educated in sound have a communal way of being able to articulate, wants and desires and changes in a way that's cohesive globally. And that was, I think, a very strong, result of this system. And with that, I'll play a little bit of these. These are some of the final sounds. So this is the BEV on for Mach-E. So when the customer gets in, the door open, the welcome animation plays, and that push to start.
Ready to go.
Yeah, and you can begin to hear some of the power sounds in there and a bit of the simplicity. And then at the opposite end of the experience was BEV off. So when they push the power button off.
Interesting. I'm just very curious about this stage here, Brian, because I'm a car lover and I do test various cars. And recently I tried another car with a Chinese brand, and I was in the car and I said, and the window was open and the sales guy was outside, teaching me the car, because for me being a boomer, you have to have some kind of intro to a new e-car. Where's the key? Oh, it's in the pocket. Okay. Is it on now? Yes, it's fine. You can if you just push it. So there was no indication for me as an old man. When I turn my combustion, I can hear the engine is on, but right now the sound is on. The sound represents the car is ready to drive. So my question is, with the next generation, I mean, do they need a sound for power on, or do they just expect that the car is always on because you just go in there and drive? So are we in a transition stage where we need sounds that we will not see or hear in the future, because then it's just, of course it's on. It's an e-car. It's always on, Or what do you think?
It's still a conversation that I think people are having on the design floor, Karsten. Is it in reverse? Is there a sound that lets the customer know that when I hit the propulsion pedal, the car will go backwards? I mean, it's silent theoretically. I mean, it's a quiet vehicle. For safety, and if you think about, I think EV adoption is there's still folks who haven't experienced EVs. So when you think about first-time user in any kind of experience, I think for safety reasons, there is prudence to using alerts and different types of messaging to tell what is about to happen or what the vehicle can do in that moment.
I agree. But I also think that the optionality, like giving the user an option to, how much sound aid do you want or how little sound aid. And of course, there should be a minimum. If I'm driving and falling asleep, I definitely should have a warning sound, or you're about to hit something, about to die sound. This sound should be very attention seeking. But as you grow into a more savvy, experienced e-car user, perhaps you don't need so many warning sounds. Have this short note here. I was talking to a friend, and he has this Yeah, it's a Tesla. And he said, looked at his car, and the car lot said, what have happened to your car? Oh, I backed into a pole,
Mm,
so it's all got a big dent. How did you imagine? How did you do that? Because there's so many warning sounds. And his answer was, oh yes, it keeps saying sounds, beep beep. So suddenly, oh, here we go. So he was over informed. He was, getting tuned out because the car was playing so many warning sounds. So even though there was a fly or leaf, it keeps beeping him. And this time there actually was a pole, so he couldn't. So he damaged his car. So he was, I would say, over polluted with sounds, and he didn't, reacted to the sound properly. So don't you think also we on a stage we need to find a balance between how much sound information should we have? Should it be light? Should it be vibrations? Or should it be a combination? Or I know it's a big discussion, but what are your takes on how much information should we have in carrying sound?
Another really great question. I think that part of the experience is also silence, and the
Exactly.
ability to tune in and out of different types of messaging. And that's why towards the end of my time at Ford, I started to think more about multi-sensory, so offloading to a haptic or using light instead of sound. Which touch point works better, which point works better when,
Exactly.
and, which feature, which moment. And there's definitely a higher level of richness to the experiences when you begin to be more thoughtful like that. Instead of just using sound for everything, there's a responsibility as a user experience designer to
Exactly.
think about the senses and think about the moment and begin to really understand what's going to work best.
I totally agree. We have this philosophy in Sonic Minds that when we do break the silence, it has to create more meaning than the silence itself. Otherwise, we're just creating noise. And I also said to people I talk to know, if bad sound could smell, it would smell like shit in many places. So
Sorry.
if yeah, so if I mean, good sound shouldn't be something you notice. It should just be there and help the user, driving or alerting. And it just shouldn't be offensive or unless you're about to dive sign, okay, of course, or a fire alarm. But other than that, it should just be a natural um, element in the user experience. And
No.
I
And
just feel
you said this a few times, Carson, and it makes me think, when you're designing sound for a purpose. And if sound is to alert, or if light is to alert, then it has to have a poignancy to it.
Mhm.
It has to have a reason, and it has to have, um, you know, the way that it's deployed, the way that it's played, also starts to kind of enter into not just playing the sound, but is it spatial? Is it on the left? Is it on the right?
exactly.
Does do we start to delve into that level of thoughtfulness as we're designing, and also as the technology can afford us to do that? And I think that that's very important as we as the cars of the future begin to evolve. You start to think about autonomy,
Yeah.
cars driving themselves. You talk about your friend who backed into a pole. Like, well, why didn't the car stop him from backing into that pole? Why wasn't there, what could we have been, what could we as designers across the board, not just sound designers, done to, not to sort of avert that from happening? And I think that that's why when I get into a meeting about the auto design, like, what kind of auto designer are you? I tell folks that I'm a holistic auto designer. I don't just think about one piece of this giant puzzle. I think about it all together. And I think that that's really the way we have to be when we're designing products and
I
experiences.
think we have to look at all the senses because a car is a multi-sensory thing. You touch it, you hear it, you feel it, you see it, and but that also makes it even more complex. In the old days, we didn't have that many options. There were no haptics. There were only few sounds, the turn signals, and and the horn. That was about it, I think. And nowadays, there's so many possibilities, which I also think it's a little bit about over-engineering. Just because we can make a sound or make this feature, we're going to put it into the car. It can open itself just by a touchscreen. What's wrong with the handle? What's wrong with the button instead of a touchscreen? When should we use a digital interface or sound rather than just have a light or a mechanical thing? So I totally agree on this point here.
Cool. So it's going to just kind of keep going a little bit and share some more of the work.
Please do.
So we worked on lightning. We jumped into lightning. So we started to think about the substance pillar and how do we bring in, tell the story of truck in that environment. So it was interesting, being a legacy OEM, the power of the build Ford tough animation that is a huge touch point. You asked me earlier about legacy sounds, and I mentioned chimes. We hadn't thought about the built Ford tough shield slam until lightning crept up, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is a huge. Actually, we thought, wow, that built Ford tough shield slam might be the Sonic logo of Ford Motor Company inadvertently,
Really?
because it's such a commonly used piece on the end of all of their commercials, marketing, and online.
Mm-hmm.
So for Lightning, it was interesting because to me, as a sound designer and somebody who's guiding the strategy, I was super excited by getting the opportunity to remix such a potent piece of their sonic ecosystem. So for the Lightning, we basically took the legacy sound and redesigned it to have a more electric feel to it. So that was, I think, really interesting, because what that did is it opened up the conversation for sonic branding. And what's interesting is, like, I could have said at the beginning of this conversation, oh, it was ideal that we were doing sound along with the visual design of the screen, but we didn't do a sonic logo until 3 years later, which, by lessons learned, everything, when you get a call from a company that has no sonic identity, the first thing you want to do is their sonic logo, because everything cascades down from there.
It can do that, exactly. Yes.
So we had some ideal scenario that we were creating visual design language alongside, but we didn't do a sonic logo for several years later. So
that's weird.
It was definitely out of order in some ways, but we were able to take the same tunable system, the same sonic ingredients, and create a sonic logo for Ford. And it was, basically building the bridge with brand, talking to marketing, and really building relationships with inside of the organization to go from product all the way up to brand and build an asset like this.
That's a really interesting thought, because we also have, as I mentioned earlier, the sound that you're playing now, if I own a Ford, this is a sound I will hear perhaps 200 times a year. So actually the product is becoming the most important brand touchpoint for many brands. This is where I hear the product daily. And if the product sounds are suddenly becoming the audio logo, perhaps this is the one I connect when I power on my headset, turn off the coffee machine, go into my e-car. These UI sounds are becoming more important than having an audio logo. So it's also the hen and the egg discussion. Why don't we go from product up to branding, and then or for branding down to product? It can go both ways. We have tried both. So it depends where the pull or push comes from. If there's a really intelligent brand leader says we need an audio logo because we have all these brand touch points, we will push them the other way. That's good. But what about all the user touch points that you have with your clients when they power on your product, if you have a product? So it can go both ways. So it's really interesting to hear how you combine that. But a question for you, Brian, then, did the marketing managers or the TMO understand the sound, or how did you argue or communicate with him? We need to sound like this because this is how all our product sounds like. So
that's the argument right there, Carson. I mean, you basically gave that's the answer. We already had sound in a Mach-E. We already had sound in a Lightning. We already had sound in Mustang. That was born from this strategy. So when it was time to go to a CMO and it was time to say, hey, let's do this sonic logo, it was hard to argue with what was already a part of our branded ecosystem.
But I could imagine that CMO say that's
they
fine.
Not that they didn't argue, but
I can imagine
was
that
already there.
If you go to the CMO and says, that's fine, you guys from product engineering, but I have my agency over here, and they made this huge, nice film here where you're going to use all these sounds. So the commercial, $1 million commercial sounds like this, but the car experience sounds like that. Shouldn't there be some kind of bridge here? So I can guess that could be a challenge. How did you?
I love that. I love that because I was presenting my product sound strategy to ad agencies,
Yeah.
trying to effectively tell them how to make sound for the brand that they were getting paid copious amounts of money to be creative for. So
Yeah.
it was really this inverted kind of communication that nobody was used to. It was fun for me because like I said, had already built a story. I already had sound on the road. So going up in front of agencies and CMOs and trying, and telling the story, there were great pieces on the board already. So it was definitely interesting because again, it was out of sync. It was out of line. But, in a legacy OEM, you're not like Rivian or Tesla or any of the China startups where it's like, we can do it all from the starting line and move forward now. So those are the inherent challenges. But at the end of the day, we were successful because we created the assets, we deployed them, we used them, and we told the story, and in a thoughtful way for the customer.
That leads me to the next question here, Brian, because what about testing? I guess you get that question here. Well, that's fine. You made these sounds, Brian, but have you tested them? Does the user really like them? So also to underpin your sound design, yes, we did test. So I'm curious to hear, how did you test this and share the testing with your peers in the company to argue that this is why we should sound like this and not like that?
Yeah, that's testing is a huge part of any user experience process. I mean, research, understanding the customer, understanding the goal, understanding their wants, and then synthesizing that into any experience building asset. So we were testing all the way along our process. We would do ingredient tests. So we had a tunable system, and we would pull out little micro pieces of our sound design and then do internal testing. Ford was great because we had such a great access to so many employees, so we could do internal testing globally and really get back great results. And then we were going outside once we had more polished assets. So all along our process, we were using testing and building data to go back to C-suite, go back to leadership, and say, this is the results. This is why this doesn't work. This is why this does work. So not only were we building a story through our product, we were building a story through testing and understanding, the response from customer.
So you did several times of testing, not only once, but also, in the beginning, but then after the sounds were in the car, we know you can also OTA, over the air, update some sounds, because one thing is hear them in a studio or in a headset, but what about the real driving experience, where there's wind noise and traffic noise? Do people understand the sounds in those environments? Have you ever also done post testing when the sounds are implemented in the cars?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's really no test like customer usability. Things break, software malfunctions, things glitch, end of line, and especially in the audit, it's hard to build a car. So we deployed Mustang, for instance, and there was a lack of some very, very subtle specific frequency that was disallowing our sounds to be heard over music. So if the customer was playing the radio and an alert came on, the bespoke sound sets that we made they blend into the music a little.
Oh, okay, I get your point.
Too much.
Yeah.
So that was a feedback that we were finding. Folks in the inside are always scouring like Reddit or different boards for customer feedback and bringing that to the team. And we started to see a lot of folks saying, well, I'm listening to music and the chimes are great, but it sounds like it's part of my song. So we started to, that was a lesson learned post delivery. So we started to think about audio ducking. So how do we, bring down music a little bit? How do we add another frequency to tell that story, to separate those layers of sound a little better? So these were discoveries that were made post delivery that we actualized on via OTA. So it's an ever evolving, process.
Yeah. I think time is flying in your company, Brian. It's such an experience and such a great talk here. So I only have a few more questions.
Sure.
I mean, what insights from your work at Ford would you really highlight to other brands exploring audio identity in a physical product?
Gosh, I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about contextual information, intelligent systems. How do we go from static experiences to ones that are more aware,
Yeah,
more
modular, adaptive, as you say.
adaptive?
Yeah.
And I think we started to, play with that in some of the work that we were doing from Lincoln. We started to think about generative. We started to think about how do we give the customer more input to the sound. So we started to play with generative soundscapes that were controlled by the user for relaxation. We started to think about how do we give the customer the ability to tune sounds in real time. So we were using rejuvenation, which is a relaxation experience, to really test the waters. So reaching out and being able to touch the screen to not only drive visuals, but to drive sound in a generative capacity. So that was a stationary experience. And what was next from there is, well, what about during drive? How do we use CAN signals or the trajectory of the vehicle to tell different stories? How does that inside propulsion become more connected to the movement of the vehicle? So starting to think about how do we use pitch versus speed and RPM, torque, and all of these different kinds of different real physical pieces into our sound design. And I think that there still is a lot, like you keep saying, we're just scratching the surface. We're just at the very beginning of how do we connect sound and the customer in the experience. And I think that with intelligence and contextual and generative, I think the future of sound inside the automobile is looking very bright, and there's a lot of potential. So I think that we have a lot of room to grow and a lot of space to keep pushing.
Yeah, and it keeps evolving also because the unit journey from an e-car often starts from an app. So you start by, looking at your app, how much power does my car have? Where is it parked? And you can also open the car from the app. So the sounds or the user experience in the app is an extension of the car. Also, you talk about, I totally agree about the holistic user journey. Don't just only focus on this one sound for this function. You need to create an audio architecture, a holistic sound design system that combines the whole user journey together. And easy said, but difficult to implement, I can guess, in a big company.
I think in any company. I mean, right now with AI, and in using this word intelligent or intelligence, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Have we even begin to understand what it means, what its capabilities are, and then how do we infuse our products and our experiences with that next level capability? So I mean, we're again perhaps with AI and intelligence, we're at another inflection point with design, and hopefully we can all be a part of that.
Very interesting. Yeah, AI is a whole other topic, about, adaptive. I always wish that if in a car that they should say, okay, now it's nighttime. So how loud should the sound be? Is it raining outside? And also microphones outside the car so you can record, if the new car is also so silent inside, they're acoustically designed, so it's very silent, but I cannot hear the ambulance or the fire truck coming behind me. So there should be this sound from the exterior should be played from the directional inside the car so I can hear where's the truck or ambulance coming from. So all this, intelligence must also be a huge complex thing in cars. I was trying this Volvo, and my partner walked around the car, and it was spatial, so I could hear exactly just by closing my eyes. Okay, now he's over here. Now he's in left behind me, and so I totally agree. This adaptability and AI, I just think we have touched the surface of modern e-cars and also automotive driving. Which role should sound have in that experience? That's another topic itself here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So lastly, Brian here, what new challenges or innovations are you most excited about in a multisensory or spatial user experience?
Wow, I mean, that's like I said, I think that we're just starting to scratch the surface of generative. I think we're starting to really, understand, how to connect the customer to the experiences in different ways by multi-sensory. So that's still very exciting to me. And like I said, beyond even auto, like how do we start to scale into different spaces like architecture? train, different types of public spaces. How are we using sound above and beyond auto, and in a connected way to keep people engaged, to keep people safe, and keep people happy.
And if there's any car brands you're listening, how would you recommend them to start? Based on your experience, should it be which skills should they have in-house? Which skills should they get partners, and then when should they talk about sound in creation of a car?
Well, so as soon as you can. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
we talked about this earlier. There's a sameness starting to happen with visual design. I think in branding, and I think that sound has the power to really communicate the characteristics of a brand in a world where things are becoming more homogenized visually.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important for brands, whether you're an OEM or any product or experience, to think about how sound can tell your story. Because like you said, there's touch points that are happening all day long where sound can play a part of that and be, reinforce your brand.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I feel we could discuss this for hours. And just to wrap this up here, I believe that, you say that a picture can say more than 1,000 words, but a sound can say more than 1,000 pictures. So again, also, I totally agree with you. I think it's important that the sound is as equal part of the design process. I also heard that from Apple when I had discussed that with them, that they also think sound right away. They don't come in last minutes and say, oh, by the way, we need a sound design for this product here. It has to be seen as an equal ecosystem. And I strongly believe that the brands who understand that, which is also why I see that these companies and brands that are born digital, like we talked about earlier, they have this edge of better sound design, whereas the other ones, sound cheap or odd. And if a company or brand isn't better than it sounds, if the user UI sounds cheap, it's a cheap car. If the sound's annoying, it's an annoying car. It's as simple as that. So thank you so much, Brian, for all your thoughts here.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, guys, I think it's time for the Q&A now. There's a couple of amazing questions coming in from people.
Hit us.
Brian, I'll just hit you straight away here. This is from Max, saying, traditionally, the sound of a car comes from the combustion engine and the exhaust system. That has established an expectation that a car going faster has a rising tone, whereas a car going slower has a descending RPM or tone. With EV cars, we don't need to follow that, but we still have the expectations to consider, which also work as a communication to passengers. How did you approach that with the Mach-E? And how did you make sure that to maintain that muscle car feel in an EV car?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think psychologically sound works. Sound does certain things based on physicality. Inertia, science, and sound work together really well. So, you talk about acceleration or deceleration, up and down, ascending, descending. Sound, and even in an analog environment, works a certain way. And not to be skeuomorphic, skeuomorphic is kind of a bad word. As sound designers, we use what works with sound, even in our digital or in our cinematic compositions, to continue that psychological connection to effectively what's happening at the moment with the product. So with Excel and decel alerts and things like that, there will be a certain specific type of technique that we want to imbue the sound with in order to glean the same response from a user. Now we have a lot more creative freedom than just the mechanical workings of something physical, but it's important to create some kind of tangent that psychologically still lets a human know. I think that's the first part. I mean, and then when I started about the different pillars of the sounds, the power pillar was born, and there was a connection between the rumble and the throatiness and the visceral quality of the old school Mustang engines. We were just taking synthesizers and using different filters and sweeps and things over that tone in order to replicate. But there was a sameness, even though it was more enhanced or enlightened, so that there was something evocative of that, from that old school legacy sound to that new school synthesized sound. And there was a connection, so that psychologically people would be like, yes, I get it. I still am thrilled in the same way. I'm still feeling that visceral connection to my car. And, I think that'll always happen. Otherwise, you get too far out, you become surreal. And that's not good.
I also talked to another person about this, and he said we don't want the sound to be smelling like gasoline because we go away from pollution. So it couldn't be, the sound of gas combustion engines. It has to be some other kind of power, like the Star Wars Hoover machine, something else that doesn't, so we have to invent a new sound of power that doesn't originate from a V8 machine.
Well, it's interesting. Everybody, we hear all of the AVAS sounds driving by us now, or in parking lots and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's a sameness to them, and sometimes the car. I'm not sure which brands are. What was the conversation about musicality?
Mhm.
How much can we push musicality into this audio experience? And not basically have like an ice cream truck drive by at the end of the day. So it's always about checks and balances, and it's always about artfulness. And I think that good design is really in a blend of all of it, and still effective.
Well, great answer. Thank you, guys. Speaking of AVAS, Zach asks, also curious about AVAS standardization. Do you foresee a standardized key signature interval or other characteristic in the future to avoid a dissonant or discordant soundscape of the future that is dominated with EVs and plug-in hybrids?
Oh my God, dude. I don't want to talk about standardization at all. It's so frightening. I mean, that was like I was always like this gray box at Ford is, I didn't mention, but you start talking about things like ADAS or autonomous driving. So you get a user who goes from one brand to another, and there's totally different sounds for lane keep. How are we keeping them safe? Standardization? Oh my. So I don't want to jump into that, but it's hard to tell where it's going to go. There's a lot of freedom right now, and I think that there has been, but there's inevitably a sameness to the work. So it's interesting to see where it goes. And then again, silence. At the end of the day, people become more educated and they become power users. Do they need the same kind of sonic or light reinforcement? Hard to tell. So stay tuned.
I agree with you, and I also believe this language we have educated, within red is stop, green is walk, and also play and pause. We have made some kind of icons that can cross through different brands and languages, but also in sound. We do know some sounds, so this is probably an alert sound, so the functionality is also crucial. But when it blends into aesthetics, if I have a Ford, I might have different Ford cars, a truck, an EV, and something else. I shouldn't be, confused about what does the sound mean that car composed to the other car. It should be some kind of the same language here. But in terms of AVAS, the external sounds, I don't think they have seen any standards other than it has to have some kind of volume. But we also have a unique situation now in the world here where we can actually create harmony in the public space rather than disharmony. So one goes in C major, one goes in E flat, and suddenly we have, I'm just trying to go walking down the street and I'm hearing a symphony.
Absolutely. I mean, you start talking about microphones and different types. It's a hardware conversation as well.
Yeah.
So if you have 4 Lincolns that are parked next to each other or driving down the street together, like, are they aware that there's another Lincoln in the area? Can it harmonize with the same brand product? I mean, these are the out of the box creative conversations you start to have when you really want to, delve deeper and include things like, musicality. Using, immersion, not just inside of a vehicle, but for many vehicles, so I think that there's a lot of potential, and I think that, it's a lot of fun to be had.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really interesting topic. I'll carry on here with another question. This is from Axon asking, do you aim for catchy sound or leaning more towards function and feel?
Depends on the moment. I mean, I think, if you have sounds that are feature based, that are much more about safety and urgency, then you're leaning away from melodic phrases and different things that are more creative like that, and thinking about poignancy and how to kind of just effectively communicate. So, but then again, you get to like a welcome sound or something that's not regulated, and you're able to be more artful and creative. And I think that's why a sonic strategy is so important, so that you can compose within that range of experiences and still have a holistic cohesion to your sounds. That's, that was the goal at Ford, and that's what we created, so that we could go from the different moments and still have a language that was cohesive.
Yeah, I agree on that. I mean, what can be branded sounds and more aesthetics, and what cannot be? What are really functional? Fire or you're about to die sound. It has to be more strict sound. So I totally agree on that, Brian.
Yeah, and we were, John did his webinar a few weeks ago about different sounds, and you start to think about rhythm as well.
Yeah.
You think about pacing and cadence and how you can include these other types of, things to tell the story in different ways. And I think that there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that, go back on our website to watch John website about that. So that's a whole topic itself.
That was the deep dive in sonic branding. I mean, I was taking notes. I was just a fantastic webinar.
Which great segue, because John actually has a question for you, Brian.
Oh, nice.
We see and hear sound design and branding, film, etc., moving towards less melodic, more ambient textural aesthetic. Today, some AVAS and interior sounds are quite melodic. For the auto industry in the world, do you also see things moving towards a less melodic, more sort of textural, organic soundscape?
God, you want to talk about trends? I mean, what's the trend? Like what's happening in the moment with movie trailers, in music. I mean, there's hip hop artists right now that are doing full songs over beatless, like music tracks. So it's a trend, but it's effective. It's cool. I mean, it's hard to really say. I think melody and musicality is so important to brandability. I think that people respond, the untrained ear identifies texture and subtlety less than melody and tone. So if I'd love to hear like a really a sound designer answer that question and see what they say, because I think that melody and tone are, say, brand way before texture does. You go into testing, I guarantee people are going to come back and be like, I don't know what brand that is. But if you play them something even with the shortest little melodic riff in it, right away, they're going to be able to pick it up and put it in the right place. And I think that that's important.
Yeah, to add to that, Brian, I think it's also about what's the rest of the industry doing, right? We see it in branding, in the traditional world of branding. You used to have jingles everywhere, right? And then there was sort of a backlash to that. We went much more sound designy. And now they're sort of coming back, these very traditional jingles and all that. So I do see it almost like it's a circular thing, right?
Dude, that's how trends work. But we were talking earlier about Rivian. Like, look what Dexter and the guys at Aux did on Rivian, where I think the walk up or the lock sound is a bird chirp.
It is, yeah, beautiful.
You know what it is? It's uncanny in a way. We had a couple Rivians out in the parking lot. We're listening to it, and when it would chirp, I knew the vehicle was unlocking, but I was also psychologically just looking around. Where's that bird? Where is that bird? Is he up there? Is he over there? And you talk about echo in between buildings out in a different space, how that sound reacted. So, and it was out of the box, and it was branded right away to tell the story of adventure that Rivian was trying to do. So sound design doesn't have to be music or texture. It could also be birds, animals, pots banging, like hammers hitting things. I mean, when you take a sound and synthesize it, you own it immediately. So creativity is your only limit.
To wrap this up here, I think that actually there's so much space where you can own that. If brands start thinking about this, they can take that position in sound, so they can be the car brand that sounds like organic or birds or whatever, or they can sound like the future, or they can sound like the past. So that's going to be I think talk about trends. We will see different trends within that, and that's also, rather than just sounding generic, why don't we sound like I can hear this is my car, get some more identity into it and personality, because everything's getting so generic. And also the new cars, the design look the same. Is it a BYD or Ford, whatever? I cannot really see the difference in design. There's so much the same. That's where the sound can come in and say, oh yeah, I can hear it is a whatever brand it is. So
yeah, I see that we're running out of time now. Unfortunately, we're almost closing out. We still had some questions. Thomas, Zach, Sahir, please save those questions directly to Brian and Carsten on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out, guys.
Cool.
Yeah, please connect and don't be a stranger. We've shared links to both of their LinkedIn profiles here in the webinar, which you can access directly. Yeah, we hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I want to say I apologize for not sharing my deck at the top. I was a little a little
worries.
nervous there,
Thank you so
but
much for joining, Brian. And yeah, I definitely feel that this is not the last talk we're having here. So to the other guys at the chat, in the webinar, stay tuned as we have other experts, global brands in our upcoming webinars to discuss this. So I hope you enjoyed this. And just even though this is just a top of the iceberg of the sound landscape, feel free to reach out to Brian and us if you have any questions. And thank you for joining.
thanks, guys. I appreciate you putting
Yeah.
this together.
Take care, everyone.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.